Austin, if you don't mind, with Cousineau. How long does this take when you lose someone? How long are you on the phone saying, okay, I've got option A, B, C, or D, E, F, and how do you get Austin back in here?
Well, you know this. There's only 14 of those jobs in the country, and there's a lot of people that want to come to this league. So you can imagine the list was super long of people that were interested. But for me, he was a no-brainer. He was the first person I talked to, and the first guy that came to my mind. And the relationship goes back for a while. When I first got here, he was finishing up some schooling, and then just to follow his career, not only as a player, but professionally, right? He goes to Mississippi State and gets his master's degree. He has experience there. Then he goes to Xavier, does an amazing job there. And then, in the professional ranks with the Tigers and the Rays. So we've been watching him. He's been making frequent visits to the ballpark to see our guys. And just as each year passed, spent more and more time with them. And it was an absolutely no-brainer for us. The guy loves Kentucky. He's one of our most decorated players in the history of our program. His knowledge about the swing, defense, mentality, this place, what it takes to win at Kentucky. When you look at his time here, it'd be tough to argue that there was some guys that maybe had better professional careers, but their Kentucky careers, this is one of our greatest players of all time. So, and just to have those conversations with him, just talking to him on the phone multiple times and just hearing, and learning more about his story, it was a no-brainer for us.
Did you get a chance to watch any of the World Series down the stretch after the Super Regional? What did you learn, or what did you see after the Super Regional?
Well, I just learned that we got beat by the national champion, right? It's like, man. But congrats LSU, great program, great team. Obviously, the ones that knocked us out, but just the margin of victory. You knew that going in. We felt that every weekend in our league, but even looking at those World Series games, just how many of them, it's a play here, it's a pitch here, it's an at-bat here, to where they're just constantly just on like the edge of your seat, so really good teams, and obviously a place that we want to go, and we've been close now, and tired of being close, ready to knock that door down.
Do you feel now that in baseball things change season to season, but do you feel like momentum can carry on? Obviously, you're going to turn the page and then you go to next season, but how do you build on that momentum and get over the hump?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Now that we've been there twice, we're to the spot where we want to get there. We want to bring our fans there. The experience that we had here was phenomenal in the regional, and you just think about, hey, the next step would hopefully be maybe for us to host a Super to get, and we were this close to the national seed, So playing at home is definitely an advantage, but for our program to take that next step, we have to do that, and that's why the summers are so important. Every day counts, You guys know this, but this is when our team is built, and not only built, but they get better. So we got guys off right now in summer baseball. They're out trying to get better themselves. We got guys that maybe threw a ton that are in the weight room already, working on their diet, getting bigger, faster, stronger. So, it is the summertime, but it is a time for us to close the gap and for our players to get better and our program to move forward.
When you hit the transfer portal, you're up against the clock in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Compared to a normal recruiting cycle where you can see a kid for a year or longer, how tough is it to with the success you've had, to dominate that thing and say, hey, look, we need you, we want you, yada, yada, yada?
Yeah. Well, the good news is, as it relates to the transfer portal, we don't need as many players as we did a year ago, right? And that's kind of where we want to get our program to the spot where, hey, you just need a handful of guys out of the transfer portal, as opposed to trying to bring in 12 or 13 or 14 guys, right? Our goal would be to develop our high school guys and eventually not need as many. So the transfer portal does go fast. We are checking it by the minute. I feel like we got our guys are on there hitting the refresh button, every 5 seconds and do the next guy. And just, so we've done a great job of that. I think this, the last 2 years we brought in top 10 classes. And so it goes fast, trying to have to build the relationships, tracking down phone numbers, developing relationships. And the neat thing about Kentucky is it does sell itself. right? We've gotten it to a spot now where, when you look at the facility, you look at the players, you look at our ability to, help them grow, right? As, we talk about as students, as people, as players, right? Like we've kind of have, some of that built now. So that does help in the process. And, it does help too now where you can say, hey, go back and watch that regional final game. Tell me if that's something you want to be a part of.
How much has the portal altered JUCO? Because JUCO was the portal in another era, but now if you can get a guy who's proven, maybe you don't get that guy who hasn't faced what you faced.
Sure. There's still really good players in junior college, and I think there always will be. But obviously with the portal now, you're having to take less guys out of junior college, so that's definitely changed it. I do believe that junior colleges will always have good players, but you just don't need as many because you can maybe go get the guy from a mid-major or another SEC school or things like that to try to fill in some of those gaps.
The transfer class, the portal class that came in last year, we've talked before about how it came together almost perfectly. How do you can't manufacture that. You don't want it to be lightning in a bottle, but it's how hard is it to construct that class with chemistry in mind and things like that?
Yeah, because of the video software that's out there now, you can literally evaluate them from every angle, right? Whether it's offense, defense. So the actual evaluation piece, in a lot of ways, because of the amount of video, that part has gotten easier. In recruiting, Kuzi and I have had this conversation late last night. We're in the office till after 8, 9 o'clock, whatever it was, just talking about how do we figure out their makeup, right? Like, to me, that has now become the hardest part, is to try to figure out what's inside someone's heart. So that's one of the beauties of Austin. Not only is he a great coach, he's a great evaluator. He knows people all over this country. And if you think about the amount of people that he's come in contact with, whether it's travel ball coaches, other college coaches, scouts, professional scouts, you name it, agents, advisors, he has come in contact with a lot of people. And as you guys know, and you'll see here, if you don't already know, he is super bright. He is bright. So getting the ability to ask the right questions, to be able to get on the inside to find out, well, who's close to this guy? Who spends the most time? Who can give us those, those types of information and questions. So, that's the hardest part now, is trying to figure out what's inside someone's heart. But I feel like we got a good plan and we got the right guy leading us. Yeah.
When you look at this year's roster that's coming up, you've got some holes to fill like every year. Mm-hmm. And I know it is a team thing, but some spots are more important than others. What is the first focus of trying to fill certain spots for next year?
That's a really hard question because we're dealing with the draft, Brian. July 9th, will be one of the more stressful days for any college baseball coach, right? Like the 9th, 10th, and the 11th, right? Like those 3 days are just, and that unfortunately has gotten to become later, to where it used to be at the beginning part of June. So, hey, what happens with that? Do we get Devin Burks back? Is Mason Moore coming back? What happens with Logan Martin? What happens with Zach Lee? What happens with some of these guys? And if they are not here, then the answer to that question really changes. So right now, we feel really good about the core group of guys that we do have coming back that maybe aren't draft eligible or maybe not at the spot where they're maybe considered for professional baseball, but come draft time, don't try to call me, okay? I've already got a ton of gray hairs. There'll be more coming, when it as it relates to the draft. So we'll know more when we get there.
Big Blue Nation has been tearing its collective hair out over John Calipari's roster because of the calendar, the deadlines, things like that. Every baseball coach in America deals with that every year. Do you just smile when you hear about stuff like that?
Yeah, I don't wish it upon him, or
right.
Especially him. Maybe other coaches, but not him. You guys know how highly I think of him and the rest of the Big Blue Nation. What an amazing coach. And but it does kind of feel like that. You know what I mean? It's just like these other sports are starting to feel what we feel now, and we've been doing, feeling with for a long time. So, and I would just tell the Big Blue Nation, I think they know this, but we got a Hall of Fame coach, and he knows what he's doing. And, sometimes patience is really hard for a lot of us, including me. But I believe in him, and there's no doubt in our minds that he's going to get it right and get the roster to where he wants it, because that's what he does.
Coach, you talked about the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, how busy those days are. What does the 12th look like for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Am I celebrating? Am I sad? Am I scrambling? The thing is, you want our guys to go where they feel valued and where they believe they should go. You know what I mean? And that's such a rewarding feeling as a coach, for them to hear their name and for them to get that opportunity. And if they don't, a lot of those guys have another year, or 2 years. So, obviously we would welcome them back, with open arms, and they know that. But what does the 12th look like? I don't know. Call it I don't know. Don't call me. Don't call me.
Maybe the 13th.
This group is. This last year's team is a special group, and I told them at the end of the year meeting, hey guys, look, this is the last time we'll ever be in the same room together, And so I've missed being around them. I've heard from a lot of the guys, some of them are still here working out, getting better, and even guys like Gilly is still around, getting ready for the draft, and so hopefully we'll hear his name called, but. The draft is, even for them, it's such an emotional roller coaster. You just hope it works out for them, the way they want it to. Yeah.
Coach, coming off of this season, there'll be higher expectations next year. How does that affect the off-season prep, or does it affect your approach to this off-season?
We've always said our goal is to make it to Omaha, and then not only make it, but to win the national championship, So for us, the expectations don't change. I do believe, though, that our players will have to work through and manage those, right? As a coach, that is what I've strived to do, right? That's what I believe the goal should be every year, but with those expectations for some of our players, we'll work through that, and I want us to get us to a spot where, we're not the underdog, right? That's what you want. And I thought that's what LSU, I give them a lot of credit. They were the preseason #1 and they finished #1. There's something to be said for that. So the way you handle and manage those. So we'll be able to draw from that as an experience. I've been there before, even Kuzi, when he was here, we were ranked #1 in the country. So, that'll be something we'll work through with our players and definitely help them. And we'll set the expectations for that, come fall time.
LSU was 7-7 pre-tournament. Clearly they had some pretty good players, but they had a players meeting, kind of refocused themselves. Can you point at things like that?
I think, every team, this, we went through a tough spot last year, every team goes through hard times, every team. This league is too demanding, it's too hard, the margin of victory is so small. So there's going to be times where you hit those rough patches, and that's where you rely on your culture and you rely on your players, I've often told, and you heard Darren talk about this at the end of the year, giving them a lot of freedom to control the locker room. That's what great teams and great leaders have. It's not the coaches. We don't have to go in there. That's their space. But creating an environment and having the right people in that locker room that are managing that and working through it, much like I'm sure they did. They had a players meeting, they had some guys that were great leaders and just basically said, all right, look, I'm sure some version of, look, this is our time. This is a new season, time to flush it. Let's go and let's move on. And that's what the great teams do. And that's one of the reasons why we had such a great team, is because not only did we have great players, we had great players that were unselfish. They wanted to win for Kentucky. We talked about it a ton, but they could manage and control that locker room. And, a lot of teams and a lot of programs are lost in there, just as much, if not more, than on the field. So I give our guys a lot of credit, the Ryder Giles, the Devin Burks, the Hunter Gillums, all these guys that just poured into that locker room, and just made us better, right? And the Darren Williams of the world, and we're going to have a locker room full of those guys as well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.